ready to start. Okay, Erev Tov L'Kulam. Lad Ba'omer, right? It's the 34th in the Omer, and we have the opportunity here to do what Rav Shimon Bar Yochai did all the time, right? 24/7, which was learn Torah. So we're going to be emulating Rav Shimon Bar Yochai in that sense. We're going to be spending today, this next hour, B'ezrat Hashem, in learning the Hilchot of Shehiya. So we're on page 122. Okay, so we started it already last time, and what we saw was the Hazal were worried about someone keeping a pot on the fire from before Shabbat, and it comes into Shabbat, and the worried was the guy will want to come and fix his food. He's going to come and stoke the coals, or in our sense, come and play with the fire, right? Turn it higher, turn it lower, which is Asur and Shabbos. So they made a gezerah of Shehiya, where there's certain conditions of when you can leave it on an open fire. Okay, the Mishnah Berurah brought us a introduction and a summary of the halachot of Shehiya, of what the mahloket was. And if you take a look at page 122, that top box, that box is a nice review of what we saw last week, so we can start this week. So it brings in the Mishnah Berurah that you can only leave a pot of food on a direct fire when there's no concern that you're going to stoke the coals. We're not worried that you're going to change the fire, make it higher, make it lower.
Covered.
No. We've not even talking about coverage yet. If it's covered, you can put anything on. We're talking about leaving it on when it's an open fire.
So
okay. So there's two ways to do it. One is like you said, cover it. Once you cover it, you can do anything you want on it.
Exactly.
Okay. The second way is I want to leave it on an open fire, but the food has to have reached a certain degree of cooking. A degree of cooking that I'm not worried that I'm going to do anything more to it, right? And this was the machloket of Hananiah and the Rabbanan, the rabbis, okay? The Rabbanan and Hananiah. What did Hananiah say? Hananiah said that as long as the food is at the stage of Ma'achal ben Drusai, right? And we saw who is Ma'achal ben Drusai. Who we say this guy was?
He's a thief.
Okay, he's a bandit. The guy can't wait for the food to be done. But if he waits too long, the sheriff is going to be there. He's going to end up in jail. So he's got to move. So he would eat the food when it was not yet completely done.
30%.
So Rashi would say that it's 1/3 cooked.
Yeah.
Rambam holds it's a half cooked. Okay, 50% cooked. The halacha we hold, like the Rambam, most times, that is 50%. Okay? So according to Hananiah, once the food is 50% cooked, half cooked, I'm no longer worried that I'm going to come and play with the fire. So I can leave it on a direct fire. The Rabbanan, they are much more machmir. And the Rabbanan say, no, you can't leave it on the fire.
Most of the people don't like it.
Until it's so much cooked that if you leave it on the fire longer, it's going to be mistamek viralo. It's going to become bad for the food. It's overly cooked. The more some food, once it gets cooked, you leave it longer in the fire, it gets even better. It tastes better, it gets better, it keeps whatever it is. This food already is so saturatedly cooked that you can't cook it anymore. Well, you can't get back. So that's the case when I'm not scared you're going to play with the fire, because you're not going to try to make it cook anymore, because you don't want to make it cook. So that mitzvah beralo, that's the only time you can leave it on a fire directly. So it's a huge gap in this machloket, right? Because you have on one end the Hananiah who says that if it's not even cooked yet, it's still half raw. I'm not worried. No one's playing with that. And the Chachamim is, even if it's cooked, no, not enough. It has to be cooked to the point that it's going to be bad for it. If it stays in the fire, then you can keep it on a direct fire. Okay. So the Mishnah Berurah ended and told us that the Mechaber, right, Yosef Karo and Shulchan Aruch brought down both deot. He brought down the both opinions, because the Rambam and the Rif go with the Rabbanan, who say you cannot leave it on a direct fire unless it is mistamek veralo. It's going to become bad for the food. And Rashi and his group say no, like Hananiah, that as long as food is at the stage of Machal ben Drusai, you can leave it on a direct fire. That's pretty much what we said last time. So now we're going to start with the halacha on page 124. Okay? So the Rambam writes in Shabbat, Food that has not been completely cooked. And the food that was completely cooked but mistamik v'yafelo, one may not leave it on the fire on Shabbat, even if it was placed there before Shabbat. So you see, the Rambam holds that even if it's completely cooked, but it's still good to keep it on the fire, you cannot keep it directly on the fire. And he does lefikach im garfa eish or shikisa eish hakira be'afar. Right? He did sweeping the coals or ketuma. He covered the coals. Then you can leave it on the fire.
It's then dangerous, like he's
Right.
going to play with
But
it.
Rashi, take a look at source number 4. Rashi, Masech Shabbat says, Anan, but us, that we leave a Kedera Gabakira She'en Gerufa, and it's not completely cooked yet. Ad Chananya, we hold like Chananya, says Rashi. That we hold that once the food is Machal Ben Drusai, we already can put the food on a direct fire. Okay? Now, there's a Gemara, Mesechet Shabbat, another Gemara, on Daf Yudchet, that tells us that the same is true of cooked meat. That if it's cooked, you can keep it on a direct fire. And if it's not cooked, you can't keep it on a direct fire. So what does that mean? Cooked. Cooked means, like the Rambam, completely cooked, you would think. But the Beit Yosef says no. Each one would say cooked means what their definition of cooked is. According to the Rambam and the Rif, they say this Gemara says it has to be cooked in order to keep on. It means it has to be completely cooked. It's so cooked that it's tamik viralo. But according to Rashi and his cohort, says the Beit Yosef in the second paragraph, they would say when the Gemara means cooked, it means cooked ma'achal ben drusai, like Chananya, and you can keep it on. Okay, so from the Gemara, there is no proof who is the opinion to go with. You can explain each Gemara each way.
I don't understand.
The Shulchan Aruch comes and brings down the halakha. So let's take a look. Shulchan Aruch in source number 7. And he writes, also yitain aleya tafshil mivoid yom, right? Elim kain nitfashel kod sarka v'hu mitztamek viralo. The leka, you're not going to be worried. You're not going. It's missing any lack of worried about you're going to stoke the coals. Okay, but it's nitfashel kitzat, and it's not nitfashel kod sarka. But even if you cooked it, it's mistafik v'yafalo chashinon shemen yichata v'asal asher to'aleya. Elin king garif the hainu shehitzi men kol kechalim or katam the hainu shekisa hagechalim ba'afin lamat. Okay, so says Shulchan Aruch, and the first opinion he brings down, like the Rambam, like the Rif, like the Rabbanon, that what it has to be completely cooked to the stage that it's mistavik viralo. It's gonna be bad if you keep it on the fire. And then he comes and he brings v'yesh omrim, and there are those who say shekol shnitvashel kemachal ben drusai. You're allowed to keep it on the kira. And says the Ramah, Ashkenazic posik, right? We Ashkenazim are mekel, and we put food as machal ben drusai, and we can keep it on a direct fire.
Wow, I thought machmirim. Now it's makirim.
Okay, so the Bir Halacha, the Mishnah Brura, he already brings. Look what he brings in the Bir Halacha. He writes from the Divrei HaRosh, right? The Rosh, the Rosh, Rabbeinu Rosh writes, "Shekasa the Pnei Yisrael, aduka b'mitzvahs oynik Shabbos, uvavadai lo yishmeu lanu." Right? The Rosh says the reason why the Ashkenazic poskim allow them to put food that's machal ben drusai on the direct fire is because people are machmer and onik Shabbos. They want good food. They want to enjoy Shabbat. So if you're going to tell them you can't leave food that's half cooked on a direct fire, they're not going to listen to you anyway. So therefore, says the Rosh, therefore we're meko and we allow them to put food that's half cooked onto a direct fire. Interesting idea. Sometimes you have to know your crowd, right? You have to know who it is. You can't tell them stuff that they're not going to be able to aim it on. They're not going to be able to stand on it. But says the Mishnah Berurah in his Bir Halacha, he writes here that Achmei Kol Makom, he writes, we can protest, but came the fizel lechatchil bevadei toiv leizar shemevushal kotzarka kaidim chashecha v'sakam neish. He says that you should do like the Rambam, you should do like the Rif. Lechatchil you should do like the Rambam and the Rif. Only issue is the Mishnah Berurah later on in Siman 259, when he brings the summary there he brings only one day. That as long as it's machal ben drusai, you can put it on the fire. Okay, So Mr. Bruni says, you should look at the Rambam, the Rif, the Rabbanon, completely cooked, then you can leave it on the fire. And there he says as follows. Now, there is another Shulchan Aruch, and this is in Simon Reish Nun Dalid, Sif Dalid, and here he writes another interesting halakha. And the question is, how do you learn this halakha? What is Shulchan Aruch trying to teach us with this halakha? He writes as follows: Peirot shenechalin chayin, raw fruit. Okay, you can eat it raw. An apple.
Apple,
okay,
grape,
mutter litinam saviv hakedera. You allowed to put it around the pot. For
what?
Even if they cannot become roasted before dark, but they will be only come cooked on Shabbat. Take a look at that picture over there. Raw edible food. It's not going to be cooked until Shabbat.
The process will end in Shabbat.
Right. So it's cooking on Shabbat.
Yeah, but this is not the way people they eat it.
And why is it completely wrong? Yeah, raw, but why would it be a problem? What would be the issue?
It's already mevushal.
Why is it mevushal?
Because this is the way you eat this fruit. The grape,
saying something. He's
the
saying
other
something.
things.
Okay.
So if
before we go to that,
it's gonna get warm.
Okay.
It doesn't make any difference.
We're saying it could be shenechel and chayin. You can eat it raw. Okay.
Yes.
So let's take it 2 steps here. So Shuki was saying, hold on a second. If it's raw, and you told me you can't put food that's not cooked, right? You can't put food that's not cooked on the fire directly. So how are you putting this raw fruit here? So Chaim comes and says, 1 second, it's edible, it's cooked, you can eat it. So the Vilna Gaon in the Bir HaGra says, Perot, even Shiroi and La'achlin Chayin, since you can eat them raw, lo gera mimachal ben dusai. They're not worse than food that's considered machal ben dusai. Raw food is considered 50% cooked, raw fruit.
Yeah, okay, but the problem is there's people that really eat it, or you can eat it.
It's like an apple, My example was an apple. Let's just go with what are we saying? Raw fruit that can be eaten raw. Okay? So says the Bir HaGra, V'leshita tam, da'achal, da'acher k'ma'achal ben dusai, shari. Once the food has hit the stage of ma'achal ben dusai, you can put it onto the fire. Right? But
to the fire,
you can put it directly on the fire. Since the raw fruit, the Bir HaGra says, it's considered already halfway cooked. You eat it. So says the Yakut Yosef. Okay. Says the Yakut Yosef. Let's read what he writes over here. Regarding food that is completely cooked, or that's been cooked halfway. It's not completely cooked. Yesh orim shemuter. You can put it. There's opinion that says you can put that directly on the open flame if it's half cooked. Right? Kemo petila shel nefet. What's this? Okay, that's just the fire. Ogaz the tzarich to the shop. Ain't tzarich litain teshel metechet or asbestos. You don't have to put the blech. Lahafsik ben eish lekadero. If no netashel harlich mistamik, v'atzim megafel l'tavshin. Okay, so he says you can. So the Yakut Yosef, like the Ramah, like Rashi, like Hananya, you can put the food that's machal ben dusai on a direct fire. But yesh cholkim, and some argue. But he writes, "Minagas faradim kesavra rishona, umeshayam me'erev Shabbat tafshil ketzka gabe esh giluya." He says you're allowed to put it. The minagas faradim that you could put it.
What?
Half cooked food, half cooked. Put half cooked. Now, if you take a look at the next page, open flame. Fruits is raw. Is considered half cooked. On a direct flame, no, you can't do that. You can't do it. You can't put a direct. We'll see. We'll talk about raw in a minute before Shabbat. We'll deal with that. Give me a second. Right now, I'm talking about tafshil. That's raw. You can't put it on. It has to be halfway cooked. Now, take a look at page 128 in the Ha'ara. Why does the Yakut Yosef go that you're allowed to go with the Ramah here? Usually, we go with the Rambam. You go with the first day of. And he writes, the Kaimalon, the halacha kistam. Usually we go with the stam halacha that he brings down the first opinion. So what happened over here? He says, you know why? Because that second Shulchan Aruch about the perot, that he writes over there, the perot and achalin kimot shen chaim, dilan ketavshet nishla kamacha ben dusai, deshari. Umikol shedat maran ledina kedat Rashi v'siyatov v'chein ketav agra. He says that the Shulchan Aruch, who brought this second din afterward, has come and showed us that the Shulchan Aruch himself holds the second way.
But it's not the same.
That's
This
what
is
he
not
writes
the
in the
same.
Ha'ara. See, here the Alka Joseph right. Hold on. So just bring it what he says. He says, since Maran Shulchan Aruch later says you can put perot raw on the flame, that means that it's why can you do that? Because the perot are considered halfway cooked, and therefore you can put it on there. That means Maran Shulchan Aruch was showing you that we hold like this ma'achal ben dursai, that you can put it on the direct flame.
Okay. Yeah, but perot is not the regular food. It's not perot. Usually you eat them the way they are. They are fully cooked, not a half cooked.
So you're gonna go.
You took a grape.
You use. So you're saying the fruit is fully cooked.
The fruit is fully cooked. Apple is fully cooked.
Okay, hold on. So Rav Mordechai Elio, Tzedek Lebracha, is Ma'amad Mordechai. He argues with Chacham Ovadia. He argues with the Yalkut Yosef. He says no such thing. Sfaradim do not go with Hananya. We do not go with the Ramah. We do not go with the Rashi. It has to be completely cooked. So what was going on with this perot then? Because the Gra explained the perot that it's considered halfway cooked. He says that the whole concern of stoking the coals, making the fire higher and lower, is for the pot, right? Yeah, if you have fruit around the pot, your main thing you're cooking is the pot. Yeah. So you worry about on and off for the pot. You're not playing the fire for the fruit.
Exactly.
So therefore, Maran said you can put the fruit around it because you're not playing with the fire for the fruits. And therefore he said that. It has nothing to do that it's considered halfway cooked. And that's what the Ma'amad Mordechai wants to say. Now, the Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata writes, in practice, you should really never really use an open flame once it's Shabbat coming. You should always put a blech or use a hot plate. And one of the reasons for that is because you can't do a hazara, you can't return something ever to an open flame, even if it's completely cooked. It's like it looks like you're cooking on a direct flame. So you can never return something to an open flame. Therefore, always better to go with the blech or use something like that, so you're not going to have that problem. Okay, so in the end of the day, we have one thing I want to take a look at before we move on to the next section. We have to understand, we said, first of all, halfway cooked. How do you define halfway cooked? So, okay, before we get to there, let's do the rough. That's the next section. Okay, skipping a little bit. Hold on a second. So what do I want to show from here? 130. Talked about this. Okay. Okay, now we're going to come to raw food. Here, in the Malachat of Bishul, he writes the same thing. You're permitted to do Shehiya on a flame with food that is only halfway cooked. Nevertheless, you should optimally try to be strict and follow the opinion of the Chachamim and not doing Shehiya unless the food is fully cooked before Shabbat and is mistamek veralo. So Chatchila, you should do Chachamim, but Halakha l'maaseh, Mikra Din, the halacha is like Hananya. All right, now let's go to raw food. And Reb Tzion is very, very into the halacha right now. He mentioned this before. So we're going to go into this now as follows. Let's see over here. The Gemara says, we're worried about stoking the coals. But this pot of raw meat, shari le'anucha, erev Shabbat im chashecha betanura, my tama. We're always worried about turning the coals, but we said you can put the raw meat directly on a fire. It's talking about in the tafsha, in the kedera.
Because you know it's raw. You're not gonna do it.
So he says very good. He says, since you're not going to use it for tonight, so you're going to forget about it. You're just going to put it there, and then
wait for tomorrow.
And you get it tomorrow. And so you're putting the meat down on a direct fire, and we're talking about putting it in a kadera, actually putting it in a pot, and you're cooking it on a direct fire, and it's raw, completely raw. But that you're allowed to do right before Shabbat, because you're not going to come play with it. You just started cooking it. It's completely raw. So you playing around is not going to make it ready for tonight. So therefore, you're allowed to keep it. You're allowed to do that. And this is Rashi writes as well. Certainly, he did not place raw food there intending to eat it at night, since it's for the next day. He'll not come to play with the fire, and therefore you can put it like that. He writes also halakha. Look at source 16. He writes, "Shehiya chai shelo nitvashel kalal, kivan shehu chai mesich dato imenu ad lemachar." He forgets about it until tomorrow, so he's not going to play with this fire, and therefore it's okay. Okay, now the real question here is, it says it has to be raw, right? In order to do this, you're not going to pay attention to it, and it doesn't become cooked, we said, until it becomes ma'achal ben drusai, right? What about in the stage between raw and ma'achal ben drusai? All right, ma'achal ben drusai food that's already halfway cooked, you can put. Yeah. Raw food, the Gemara said you can put. You're not going to play with it. What about if it's in between? It's not raw anymore. How does this happen? I put it on 15 minutes before Shabbat, 20 minutes before Shabbat, right? Start to cook. Is that really raw at that point? No, it's not raw anymore at that point. So the Rochot Shabbat, he brings down that the opinion of the Chazon Ish, that raw pot is set only when the food would reach Yad Soleded Bo close to sunset, and not earlier. As if it reaches Yad Soleded Bo in an earlier time, then it's no longer going to be considered raw by Shehiya. Okay? Meaning that if you're putting it in and it's going to get boiling to the point it's Yad Soleded Bo, because he's understanding it as Yad Soleded Bo is no longer considered raw. It's not cooked, but it's no longer raw.
20% cooked.
But whatever it's cooked, it's not considered raw anymore. The Gemara said, and Shulchan Aruch said, a lot of people raw. But if you leave it on the fire for a certain amount of time until it gets boiling hot, it's no longer raw. So you can't leave it on the fire like that. That's what he's saying. You got to put it in a stage that has to be before, right before. Okay.
But this is only if you're playing with a fire, open fire.
Right. Okay. This is open fire. We're talking all this is about talking about open fire right now.
Why not?
It has to. So that's what he says. The point has to be before. It has to not hit Yad Soleded Bo. He writes. It has to hit not Yad Soleded Bo before Shehiya. That's what he writes over here. Now. Here,
about 5 minutes is also fine.
Okay.
It's also
here, the Malachot of Shabbat, he brings down the Sephardic poskim, and he writes, when discussing that food must be raw at the onset of Shabbat, right? The time is defined as Shehiya, okay, and not the time that you decide to take Shabbat,
right?
Okay, it has to be that raw. Okay. Now, what about? Hold on.
The woman, they know what to do. This is what they do.
The what?
They put, if they want, they put something raw, so they put right before Shabbat, and they forget about it.
Okay, what is raw? He defines here raw. This is definition, Sephardic definition of raw, and he brings that raw meat is considered raw as long as it has not has softened from the heat, even if it's reached Yad Soleded Bo. So the Chazon Ish held that it's raw until it reaches Yad Soleded Bo. Here he brings from the Or Letzion and others that it's considered no longer raw once it becomes soft from the heat.
Medium raw.
Couple minutes until the is on.
So that macaroni is already pretty cooked, but I guess like the meat. I mean, meat is soft to touch when if it's at room temperature. No. So I guess that it has to cook to a point that it becomes even softer. And that's the point that it's no longer considered raw. So you have to put it into the fire right before Shabbat at a point that it won't be soft by shkia, because then it's no longer considered raw, and then you can't use that kula of putting something raw on the flame, on a direct flame. Okay, that's the way he learns it over here. Fine. Now, says the Piskei Tshuvot, another idea over here. He says, 1 second. Let's say I'm putting the food on the fire raw, but that food is possible to be completed for the night seudah. Right? What was the whole Gemara? The Gemara said you're going to leave it there, you're putting it in, and forget about it because it's for tomorrow. But let's say it's such a food that will be ready by tonight. Right? Whatever it is.
Something like this, you cannot put.
So he writes, even if it's raw, if it's going to become ready that night, you can't use it.
There might be something like this. You're not allowed to put on Eshgluya because you might.
So in the next section, on page 132, he brings down from Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, from Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, from Nissen Karleitz, from Yosef Eliyahu Henkin, all these big poskim who say that this whole thing of putting raw right before Shabbat, because you're not going to worry about it, doesn't apply to today's cooking appliances. Because they used to cook, it would really take a long time to cook.
Right.
And today's ovens and stuff like that, we can cook quickly. It doesn't take that long. And therefore, he says, Rabbi Henkin here in his Kisvei Agoyin of Yosef Eliyahu Henkin, he writes that you can't sing to him out there putting raw in today's appliances. And he's saying because the whole thing is based on that it's going to be ready for tomorrow. And right.
And now they're making it their abundance. What are you doing?
He's saying you can't use this kula putting the raw.
They're making up a derabbanan. They're making up a new derabbanan.
Okay, so they are. Hold on 1 second. This is okay. So now, what did I put anything here? I saw something different over here. They say that today, you're right. So therefore, even if you're cooking with modern day ovens and stovetops, which can cook much faster, you are allowed to do shehiya by placing raw pieces of meat in the dish, because the action of putting the raw piece of meat into the pot shows that you're not thinking about the dish any longer. Right? This is the way he brings down from the Sfadim poskim. Even though technically it can be ready in time for the Friday night meal. Okay, so unlike the Ashkenazic poskim, the Sephardic poskim saying, no, you can put it inside. As long as you're putting it into the dish, putting it in raw, that shows it's for tomorrow, even though it's going to be cooked for tonight. Okay? Okay, fine. Now, for the Ashkenazim who hold like these poskim who say that today's appliances, you can't do this, there's still one appliance that does work. The crock pot, right? The slow cooker, right? So the Shabbos kitchen, he writes, nowadays, this leniency of raw meat cannot generally be applied upon, since the modern cooking methods, almost any type of food can be cooked in a relatively short period. However, this ruling does apply with a crock pot, which cooks slowly. Therefore, it's permissible to put raw meat, page 133, in a crock pot without any blech immediately before Shabbat, provided that one is certain that the food will not be ready for the evening meal, right? Moreover, even with the pot of partially cooked food, it's sufficient to put in one piece of raw meat to exempt the entire pot from requiring a blech. Okay. What? No. Always put it. Why? In and of itself. Okay. Let me just see what I brought down here from Rabbi Nachson. I put down some interesting things.
I went to the crock pot so that the kids can eat from it already from before Shabbat.
But it's ready.
They cooked it
So it's ready. Everything is ready. So it's no problem.
Which לפני זה לא טעמה, לפני זה כבר זכו. לחמים, זה חמים מוכן לפני.
So Here in Rabbi Nachshon, he writes, if the food even cooks slightly before the onset of Shabbat, right? I'm assuming this is saying that it's not really longer considered raw, then you would need the blech. Then here he brings the same thing. There are some poskim who state that nowadays this leniency cannot be relied upon with the raw, since modern cooking methods, almost any type of food can be cooked in a relatively short period. However, others permit doing so even nowadays, and one may be lenient as long as one's intention is to consume the food during the day meal and not at night.
No, but if you want to say that our cooking is different,
Yeah.
then still doesn't apply in the first place because you're not doing anything.
Right.
And if you want to say the same thing, then raw should apply. You can't have
But
the whole
Both. You can't.
both
You're
ways.
right. But that's what they're doing.
But today, nobody's cooking for Shabbat on fire, real fire. Either you cover it or either you have a black.
Here he brings one more idea over here. He says that the fire is too low, that the food will not even be cooked by the next day, then it would not be permitted to place it on the fire on Erev Shabbat. It has to have been cooked. It must get cooked by the daytime. If you're not going, if it's going to be and being not cooking, then you can't do that. Okay.
They bring over here
What did
a
I put
picture
here?
of the
109?
Shehiya. I remember that we used to put Shehiya for Shabbat.
Okay,
like
one-
this. I remember. Shehiya. It's like this. You see the picture here? Like the fire, and they put on top of it
The gas.
the thing. It's no, it's not a samavar.
It's a gas burner.
It's not a gas burner. It's oil.
It's an oil
You
burner.
put oil underneath, and there's something like the Nerot Shabbat. How the but this is
Oshton. There you go. Oshton. That's right.
It's
Okay.
built in.
One last idea, Rabotai. One last idea. He writes over here that this room of Shehiya, putting something raw directly on a fire, is only room to permit a raw dish which involves a liquid, right? Putting it into something. However, you're not allowed to do Shehiya with a raw piece of meat that you intend to roast over a fire in a manner where it touches the coals or the flame, right?
I don't understand.
So right before Shabbat,
Yeah.
I want to take my my stick of meat and put it over the flame.
Yeah.
Can I do that?
Right before Shabbat?
Yeah.
Why not?
Shehiya, it's raw. Putting it on the flame.
Before Shabbat? Long as it's not Shabbat, you do it.
But it's going to be cooking on Shabbat.
right away.
You put it on the
It's a raw piece. He said the whole thing we're talking about is a raw dish that goes into a liquid. So if it's directly on the fire, he says it makes an exception here.
Yeah, something like
If it does
this.
not touch the coals or the flame, then it depends on the type of meat. If it's a large animal, right, cattle, cows, sheep, cannot have Shehiya done to it while it's still raw, because roasting is a fast way of cooking, and therefore you're going to be playing around with it.
Absolutely.
Okay, but he writes on the other extreme, you could do Shehiya with sliced baby goat meat or chicken that is being roasted. They can make sure not to touch the flame, no matter how roasted it has already been, even when it's between raw and machal ben drusai. This is because there's no concern of you coming to stoke the coals with such food and roasting, because even the slightest fluctuation of heat can ruin the food. Okay? No one's going to be doing this, but it's interesting to see this. Depends on the meat and depends how you do it. If the food is touching the coals of the flame, then it will be forbidden. Okay, fine. This is an interesting idea.
Nobody does this.
All right, now let's move on to, we've been talking about Machal ben Drusai, this bandit, he ate. So how do we define it? So we saw Rashi. Rashi said, Listim Hoya, he was a bandit. And he would eat it third way cooked. All right. So third way. So if you have 33%, right? Chop it in three. The Rambam, when he's teaching about Bishul, he says that Chati Bishul is Chayiv. So that Machal ben Drusai, according to the Rambam, is half cooked. So Shulchan Aruch Harav, right? He brings down. Some say it's a third, some say it's a half. And for the terms of halacha, that usually we go with half. But b'di avad, one could permit the food under any circumstance if it was 1/3 cooked before Shabbat. So technically, if it's some tzarach or something like that, even if it's a third cooked, you can put it on. Says the Shulchan Aruch Harav. Okay. Mishnah Berurah likewise says, Machal ben Drusai, some say Chatzi Bishul, some say a third. And the Shulchan Aruch says it's a half, like the Rambam. And however, b'tzarach gadol makom mitchak efsher the yesh lahakel with a third. Okay, so that's what we seem to come out. That shmachal ben dusai lahalacha is half. In places of a tzarach, you can consider it a third. You can still put it on the fire directly. Okay, Piskei Tshuvot writes, there's a machloket of what it is, but how do you define it?
Who's Harav Shulchan Aruch?
Shulchan Aruch Harav, this is the Lubavitch. Shnei Zalman Liadai, the Alter Rebbe, the Balatanya. Okay, that's
The first Rebbe of Lubavitch.
There you go, first Rebbe, beautiful. Okay, he was in prison. He had that whole miracle. He got out, right? Okay, a lot of good stories. All right, now, so the Piskei Tshuvot, for example, if something is properly cooked in 2 hours, so how do you define? You say Machal ben Dusai is a third cook, half cook. So how does it work? So it says if the food is cooked for 2 hours, then half cooked is 1 hour. A third cook is 40 minutes. But he says, when you make this calculation, you have to take out a certain part out. Which part? Until the pot gets to Yad Soledito. That's not counted in the calculation of the time. Because that's not cooking time. That's the time till it can start cooking.
20 minutes.
So whatever it is, you got to remove those 20 minutes. Because that's getting it to cooking. Cooking starts at Yad Soledito. And now half cooked is half the time that you need to cook it. So you got to remove the preheat time, for the oven, because you put it in preheat right until it gets hot. And same thing with the pot. You're starting the pot until it gets to that heat, till it's a roiling boil, right? Until it gets Yad Soledito, you have to remove that time. Then he writes, some say don't calculate it this way, because if you take a look at the way food's cooked, usually food gets cooked all of a sudden at the end, right? Like it builds up. Right? Like last week I was at the grill. I'm at this grill. I'm trying to grill this burger. I keep opening, looking inside, still raw. I'm like, what's going on with this? And then I leave it down for 1 minute, literally 1 minute. I go inside, I come back out, it's already starting to burn. It was already done. Like that last minute, it just all became completely cooked. Right? So he says, this is what happens. So therefore, he says, maybe you don't assess it this way, halfway within the time. Maybe you have to assess it with it halfway that it actually becomes cooked, which would mean more towards the end. Right? After to do it that way. Okay, he brings down to Orchot Shabbat. Says the Chazon Ish says we only can measure half cooked by the amount of cooking time, and not by cooking quality. Okay, we do it by the time, he says. And after half the time, it's considered half cooked. Again, he says the same thing in the end. Some have to do further study because most people say it cooks all at the end. Here he writes down in the Malachat of Bishul over here, Sfaradim, he writes, how do you calculate food that's reached Machal ben Dusai, halfway cooked? Like we've been saying, you split the food's regular cooking time in half. It takes 2 hours to cook, then we can assume it reached Machal ben Dusai when it reaches the 1 hour mark. However, you must bear in mind that the time it takes for the food to reach the temperature of Yad Soledito is not included in its cooking time. Okay, so we got that out of the way. Okay, now that we got all these things out of the way, we can start talking about the contemporary kitchen. All right, so we have today kitchens. We don't have coal cooking. I'm not cooking with coals. This whole kira was an oven, like we saw, that had coals on the bottom and 2 places for pots on the top. That was the kira. We said get rid of the coals, or put ashes over the coals.
Put something on top.
Right. So does the same apply to what we have today? Okay, the gas stoves. So the Shulchan Aruch brings an interesting halacha. Okay, guy wakes up in the morning and sees that his food is burning, and he's concerned that it'll burn even more. So what should he do? He removes the dish from the fire.
Don't put it on the floor.
Right, and place a used empty pot on the stove
underneath,
and then put the pot of food on top of the empty pot. Okay, so you have what we're assuming is that there is a direct fire, So you take the pot off the direct fire, put a
Something
in between, and put that pot back on top of that.
It's gonna make it less
Okay.
heat.
So says Rav Moshe Feinstein and Igor Moshe over here regarding gas, right? He says using a metal sheet covering, there is no greater visual cue than this. Ein heker gadol mizeh, umuter, right? He says that's all you have to do because the gas stoves are never covered for the purpose of cooking, right? You need a hecker to show that it's not directly on the fire, and you never cook during the week with the blech on it. So putting the blech, that's enough. V'lefize af beloy kisui gam ala kaftorim sha'al yadam mikatinim umagadilim. He says even though that you're not covering the buttons or the knobs, right? Because
you don't need to do it.
Because what's the whole thing of stoking coals? Stoking coals is you're making the fire go higher. If I put a blech on top of my fire, I can still make the fire go higher.
Yeah,
but he's saying, no, it's okay.
You don't see the fire, that's why you're not going to make it higher.
He says, yeah, it's a hecker. Once it's a recognizable, it's going to remind me not to play with the fire. But he does write, Ach yoter tov, sha'akusi shel vacha matechot yechaseh gam et kaftorim. He said, Kadesha hecker, yeah, gam b'makom machotik kamot. He says, no. He says, you're right. Enough is to put the blech. But it's better to cover the knobs as well. Oh, so that's another question. We're going to get there in a second.
Take out the knob.
So I'll tell you the truth. I remember growing up, and my mother used to take off the knobs. She put the blech and she took off the knobs. She doesn't do that anymore today, but that's what she used to do.
Why, little kids?
No, because of this. Rav Moshe said to take off the knobs also.
Why we have to take out the knob?
For the kids, not to play with it.
Yeah, there is an opinion that says, like Rami is saying, that just taking off the knobs is enough also. But we most people don't pass in that way. Most poskim say to put the blech. Okay, hold on. He says as follows. He says, Avokim sheyoter mistaber shegam lekisa kafter who heker choshev eish lahakel b'shas etchak be'elim chos be'elu and then we have to rekusi ha'esh bilvad. So Rav Moshe says, you want to be makel, just put the blech. That's more than enough, and that's good.
No, it's also better for you to do something with the kaftorim because the kids running and.
Someone asked Rav Ben Zion Abishol, Shal Shiva or Litzir. Someone places a metal sheet on the flame. Must he also cover or remove the buttons? Okay. And he answered, it's placing the metal sheet is enough. One who places the metal sheet on the flame does not also need to cover or remove the gas buttons. But he says, it is not sufficient. It's not enough. Okay? Convention Abishul said, taking off the buttons is not enough. And one must cover the flame with it. That's his day. He says, no, it's not enough. Okay? The Chazon Ish, he goes, let's see what he says over here. He says, one second, he says that the blech is not enough. He said, you know why? The way they explain it here, at least, is that Chazon Ish is saying, what's the case of the Shulchan Aruch? Shulchan Aruch's case was, they put a pot, right, over the flame. Well, guess what happens when there's a pot over the flame? There's an air pocket in there. And then the pot is put on top of the pot that is an air pocket in there. Okay, the blech is very flat. It's right on top. All right, so he's saying, if you want to go to the Shulchan and say that's the source of the blech, well, guess what? You should have an air pocket in between. You should make some space in between the fire and the metal sheet. Okay. Okay. Now the Yalkut Yosef in source 31, he writes, if you put a metal sheet, right, put the blech or asbestos between fire and the pot, or one uses electric hot plate, one would place on it before Shabbat, even if food has not begun to cook. That's enough. Metal sheets, which is, by the way, what most people do. The Menuchat Ahava, he writes, he says, it's by letter of the law, it's sufficient to cover with the metal sheet. And it's also possible. You can also do it by just covering or removing the buttons. That's enough. But lechatchila is more proper to cover the flame. Okay, so there is a daya that just the knobs is enough. Okay, but he says also lechatchila it's better to cover the flame. Here he brings a halachot of Shabbat. He brings from Aaron Kotler that for our ovens or stoves, although it's good for the fire to be covered with a blech, the primary requirements ha'ikr hu b'kisei akaftar. All right, according to Aaron Kotler, the main thing is to remove the buttons or to cover the buttons, cover the knobs.
This is the chitui.
That's right. That's how you stoke the coals.
Exactly.
So there's many days here of how it goes. A fourth opinion is Rav Moshe Stern of Shmuel Wozner, who say, one without the other is not enough. You have to have both. Okay, you have to have both. You have to do the blech, and you have to cover or remove the knob. Okay, so there's a lot of days. I think most people, most of Klal Yisrael just put the blech and Shalom Yisrael. That's what they go with. They have some blechs that have the hangover. Right, they go on the side and actually cover it as well. I've seen those, but they're not the. You have the good things. We got to learn. The hot plates.
Much less problem.
Some of the hot plates have exhaust,
Right.
Right.
Yeah, but that's enough.
So we're gonna. I think we're touching hot plates in a moment. I think we'll touch hot plates in a moment. Yeah, we have a hot plate. You never really cook on it during the week or something like that. Okay. 1 second. Before we move on, what did I put here? I put it from the Rabbi Naxon. What did you want to say? It's the same thing, everything that we've been saying so far. The metal sheet, the blech. It's praiseworthy to also cover the knobs. He writes that just covering the knobs is not enough, though. Any electric or gas stove is considered an open fire, even if the element is covered by a layer of glass. Okay, so today's the new electric stoves, right? They heat up without an actual fire. It's a electric fire. I don't know how it works exactly. It's a coil. Okay, so he says that still needs to be covered by something. You cannot place a pot of food upon it. It still needs to have a metal sheet or something over it. Okay, that's just interesting. He brings down. Okay. Okay, just another two interesting ideas with the blech before we move on. Okay, let's say I don't have an actual blech. Can I take some silver foil, some aluminum foil, and use it?
It's gonna burn.
Okay.
The fire is gonna burn.
Let's say it doesn't burn. So what he says if it's too thin to lessen the heat, meaning if it's one layer, or maybe even if it's two layers, it's not enough to lessen the heat. It has to be, if you're gonna use aluminum foil, you could, but you have to have several layers of it. It should be thick that it should lessen the heat. What happens if a person didn't put the blech before Shabbat? You can put it on Shabbat as well, right? Shulchan Aruch said, guy woke up in the morning, didn't have it, and you can turn around the pot, so you can put the blech on Shabbat as well.
The caveat on that, I don't know if you're bringing it down.
Yeah.
The caveat on that is some of the cheaper blech, they turn red hot. And then that's the problem putting that on Shabbat. You're making it red hot.
Is it most where these are common, the cheaper blocks, or it's
I've seen it.
I know.
I
don't
haven't
think
seen.
they exist anymore, but
They had at a point. Okay.
Didn't want, then like they become red.
Okay. Now we'll try to take the next few minutes to answer Rav Rami's question on Shabbat about the electric, the ovens, really the ovens. Okay, so the oven. Let's think for a moment. Let's think what an oven is. Okay, so what was a kira? The whole thing was a kira, and a kira, you can put it Shehiya, right? If there's no flame, this and that. So
that's the top.
and then he say if you cover it, the kira, you cover it with the blech, it's fine. An oven, maybe you would think for a moment to compare it to tanur, right? Tanur was the oven where they put things inside. However, la'alacha, we say we don't compare it to tanur because the tanur was cone shaped and the heat was especially on the top, and this is not the way our ovens work. Okay. In addition, is it possible to say that our ovens already have a cover, possibly on it already, because the fire is not? At my oven, right? The fire is in the broiler on the bottom.
The door is the cover.
No. The broiler is on the bottom, right? And then there's a whole layer until it gets to my oven, right? Until where I'm cooking. So some poskim say no, that's since it's part of it, it's not considered that it's covered. Some want to say that it is already considered covered. Rav Moshe would hold it wasn't covered. Rav Moshe said you should have an insert in the oven if you wanted to use the oven, like a box inside of it. You would put stuff inside. But let's take a look over here what he says. Okay, so now okay. So now let's say that you covered you put an insert in the bottom, you covered the fire, you made it and stuff like that. Okay. But you have other issues with the oven. Okay,
It has a thermostat.
So what happens?
Is the minute it's get
So the different types of thermostats. Some thermostats, it's automatically. The minute you open it, the minute it starts to go. Some thermostats are not like that. Right? The temperature has to change enough for it to realize to start working.
How are you gonna know?
Okay. And then there are some ovens that have today what's known as Shabbat mode.
You're talking about here, you're talking about Hazara and closing the oven again.
Now we are talking about it's already Shehiya. It's already what's it called covered. Okay. Can we still use this oven for other issues?
What about here about the thermostat? We're not only talking about Shehiya, not talking about
We're not talking about Shehiya anymore.
Listen,
Finished.
you open
Yeah.
the door.
Now we're talking about.
You
We already
open
said
the-
that's not a problem. It's covered. Chamabadi actually holds it the cover in the thing. From where I understood it, is right. Now we're talking about using the oven on Shabbat,
Exactly.
opening it,
You
and
open
perhaps closing it again,
fire,
perhaps
the
returning food to it again.
I mean, if the whole problem is, we're just talking Shehiya, what up here at thermostat? If I'm just opening one, taking out the food, I'm done. The question becomes if I'm closing it
You're
again,
still you might if you're causing something to happen.
Yeah.
closing it happens automatically.
It's only automatic. It doesn't happen the minute you open it. If it happens as a grumma indirectly, it happens once I open it. The temperature changes. But there are some there are some ovens that the minute you open it, it already starts.
The fire
As soon as you start to go, that you couldn't do. Okay,
because
it has
you
to
open,
be.
the fire comes.
Okay, so give me a second.
Well, open it, if anything, the opposite. It turns off and then
Here.
it turns back on.
Let me take a look from this sefer. I see everybody jumping here. Let me read from what he says over here. He says, okay. He says we have today 3 types of ovens there. He writes. Some ovens control their heat through a thermostat. With these ovens, the moment you open the oven door, it's such a special oven. The moment you open it, the oven turns on and keeps its heat at the correct temperature. You're not allowed to use such an oven on Shabbat because by opening the oven door, you are doing a direct action of turning on the oven on Shabbat. This is direct.
Yeah.
Okay. If it's such an oven that the second you open it, it starts doing its thing, can't use it. Now, some ovens also work through a thermostat, and these are the ones we're more familiar with. I guess this is more of the affordable ovens, right? They work with a thermostat, but do not turn on the moment you open the door. Right? Rather, these ovens take a little while for the oven to feel the drop in the temperature.
What's the difference?
Okay, because now you're not doing it directly.
Yeah, but because you open, it's going
Right.
the fire.
But
gonna come
it's
afterwards.
a grumma. I don't want it, right? It's all these side things that now allows you to use it.
מותר לי, תקשיב, היה איזה ויכוח נושא מאוד גדול, מאוד ארוך. אני אומר לך, לפני חודש היה פה, כל האנשים בדקו את זה, הגיעו עד ישראל לבדוק עם אנשים, הדבר החשמלי הזה, כן, וגם אוהד, הרב אוהד, ישב על זה, ואני אומר לו, אוהד, אני מכיר את זה, זה תרמוסטט, אבל כשאתה פותח,
It starts to work.
it takes 10 seconds for the sensor to work. הוא אומר לי, there's no problem, you can do it. אני אומר לו, אוהד, הוא אומר לי,
As long as it's not the second that you're opening it.
the thing that he was there that which was
Although, so he writes here, although you are technically permitted to use such an oven on Shabbat, optimally it's better to be strict and not open the door. But Mikra Hadin, you're allowed to use it. Chamavadia, the Akut Yosef writes, in such a case, you're allowed to use it without a problem.
What is the difference between this and hot water in Shabbat? Also, you open the thing for the hot water in Shabbat.
Which opening what for Shabbat?
The hot water in the sink.
Yeah.
You open the hot water, okay? You are not allowed to open. Why? Because the fire afterwards, after a few minutes, is going to start.
The temperature in the tank is boiling.
Yeah.
You're putting cold water right when you pull.
Yeah.
The minute you go in
A flame takes them another 10 minutes.
You start the fire.
No. The flame is takes them.
It's not a grandma, but here it's a grandma.
Beyond Tov, you can do it. Beyond Tov, people use it.
Okay, now the third type of oven, which has the least troubles for Shabbat, is the oven that has the Shabbat mode, which continuously emits the heat at the same temperature. Does not turn on or off.
It doesn't exist.
I-
I'm just listen.
The way it works, I'll tell you the way it works. I'll tell you.
The way it works. I'm listening.
The way it works is that it's that thing every like 10 minutes, check the temperature. Not based on when you open or close it.
The temperature drops. The temperature drops. If you stop an oven, it drops. Let's say 200.
Yeah, it's
Give it a 2 minutes. It drops.
Yeah, in a chanami. But it
Okay.
doesn't, but the way it goes back on,
You can
It-
tell me it doesn't listen to the opening.
that's what I'm
And
saying.
close it.
It doesn't.
That's it.
That's what
Oh,
I'm saying.
Time it.
Right,
It's
Yes,
right.
Fine.
right. So that's
fine.
nothing to do with me. Right.
Exactly.
That's it. It's working on its own. That's the same thing with a lot of the Shabbat refrigerator modes, right? It's the same idea. It's doing its own thing. Nothing with me opening and closing it. Okay. Now he ends off the paragraph here. Even when using a given oven which is permitted, whether this oven that works with a thermostat but is delayed, or you're using the oven that's a Shabbat mode. And even though the fire is essentially covered on the bottom because it has that separation between the fire and the oven pocket, right? Nevertheless, it is still proper for you to be strict in making some sort of extra sign, right? The Akucha brings this down as well. It's down on the outside of the oven. You should write Shabbat by the knobs or something like that. However, if you did not add such a reminder, it's still permitted to be used on Shabbat because it's already considered covered, and the person can go ahead and use it. And he has to be careful also that the lights and signals and stuff like that, right? That's what the Shabbat mode also does, is takes away all those things, right? Because if you're opening it and lights and signals come out, that's another issue also.
Shabbat mode also puts Shabbat.
Oh, tells you Shabbat. That's the hecker right there. Yeah. Okay, interesting. I didn't think. Yeah.
The original Shabbat mode is Rabbanim.
Right.
The one that gets all the details they worked out.
Because the refrigerator also goes, it says SB for Shabbat. I didn't understand that it was like a hecker. I thought it was just telling me that it's in that mode. Okay. Okay, fine. All right. So hold on one second. 431 in this sefer. What do I want to say?
הוא לא מקשיב לך.
431.
כמו עם שתשים מים חמים, לא בוולגר, בבוילר.
438.
איך אתה עושה את זה?
Okay, 438.
אתה מושך מים מתחיל לעבוד.
Okay, this is also going, this is like Rabbi says about Chazara, as well as using the oven. In order to reheat food on an oven on Shabbat, the oven must have a switch. He writes here, the oven must have a switch that can turn it into Shabbat mode. Okay?
You could do Chazar in the oven on Shabbat, that's the yoke.
Yeah, in order to reheat food in an oven on Shabbat, the oven must have a switch that can turn it into Shabbat mode, where the heating elements of the oven do not turn on or off as a result of being opened or closed. Furthermore, the heating elements of the oven must be covered, and the item that is being, he writes, and the other item that is being heated up must be food that is fully cooked dry. One must also place the food on a metal sheet or pan in order to show that one is not actually cooking in a regular manner.
No, never sheet, but no pen.
In other words, he's saying.
Not a regular
I
pan.
was gonna say.
שלא ניכר.
Right.
Over here, what do you mean I'm putting in the oven? So you're saying he's adding in, you have to put something.
Put something that shows you're not, it's like you're not regularly using it.
You're not cooking.
Also preferable to cover the knobs of the oven as well. Okay. Fine. So that's on that. Let's end off our topic for tonight with hot plates. Okay, so we talked about hot plates.
מהיר.
We have 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I'm here.
Rami wants a half hour.
All right. Hot plates does not require any further covering. Okay, hot plate that itself, in itself, is the hecker because you never really cook on a hot plate. Okay, an electric hot plate, there's no need to place a separation, says the Yalkut Yosef. However, there is a Rav Yosef Shalom Elyashiv who writes, no, you should still cover it with something. You should put some foil.
Yeah,
You put some foil. Now we talked about foil on the hot plate. To cover it over, to do something to it. You don't have to, but that's what some do.
What about the chilling pot?
The crock pot.
Yeah. Do we put the metal foil
We're gonna get
underneath?
into the crock pot next week, Bezat Hashem. We'll get into the crock pot next week. What do you have to do for it? Okay. Now we talked about a hot plate that had multiple options. What did we say for that? We said that in itself is still okay. And if you're worried, you can just cover it with something or put a sign or something like that. But a hot plate, because you never really cook it, that would be okay. All right, so that gets us through Shehiya. Next week, we will do Be'ezat Hashem Hazara. Okay? So more good stuff. רבי חנינא בן קשיא אומר, רצה הקדוש ברוך הוא זכאי ישראל לפי חיבה להם טוב מצוות שנאמר, אדוני חפץ למען צדקו יגדיל תורה וידיר.